In our next conversation, I'd like to Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. There are many good and bad things about LDS Church history. Sometimes it causes people to leave. In our next conversation with Sunstone Podcast host John Larsen, we'll talk about why I choose to stay in the LDS Church. Check out our conversation. Hey, I just wanted to mention one other thing. Beyond the Blocks is an awesome podcast, and it seeks to center the narratives of the marginalized in conversations on Mormonism. A Black lifelong member and queer theologian, Brother Jones and Brother Knox, seek to fill the gaps between Mormon theology and Mormon culture that find all kinds of identities may claim a seat at the table of Christ. So check out Beyond the Block. It's a great podcast. Now back to our conversation.
But before we go, let's talk about you a little bit.
No, we don't want to talk about me.
So
I'm very boring.
So you're a believing Mormon. A card carrying, I suppose.
Yeah.
So why are you still a Mormon?
So, at Sunstone they have that Why I Stay series.
It's the most popular session.
And I would rather, in my case, I would say, and I think Claudia Bushman said this, so I can't claim credit for it, but why would I leave? I mean, there's a lot about the LDS Church that I love. I love a lot of the theology. Not a fan of polygamy. So, but yeah, I love the Book of Mormon. I believe Joseph Smith was a prophet. My Dan Vogel, we got into the first vision narratives. Are there some problems? Absolutely, there are some problems. Are there problems with polygamy? Absolutely. Are there problems with Mountain Meadows Massacre? Absolutely. But everybody has problems. There's no perfect church. There never was, never has been. I know John Hamer has said, if you were to start the perfect church today, tomorrow you'd make a mistake and it wouldn't be perfect anymore. And so I think that's kind of how I feel. My church isn't perfect. I know that. The imperfect parts are the stuff that interests me.
Right.
But it's a good church. There's good values. I believe in the restoration. So why would I leave?
On that note, when I went through the temple at 19, I found it. I went through 91, so I missed where they had the penalties.
Okay. Just
by a few months. And when they had taken those out of the temple, they had left part of it. So there's this Masonic back and forth where you have this thing that's named, and then it has a penalty associated with revealing it. And the church cut out part of it, but not the other part. So the hand signals that, and you know this, I'm telling this, the hand signals that
don't get me in trouble.
That people do are reference to the penalties, and these penalties are ancient part of Masonic order, right? So my point is, I was confused, and luckily my parents sat down and they filled in the gaps, and they explained to me what used to be in the 1990, which helped me understand the temple a little bit better. And then I went and bought a book of the Duncan's Ritual, and then so I read through the Masonic ceremony. Because Duncan's Ritual, you can still get at the bookstore, you can get it on Amazon. It is just a transcript of not the Scottish Rite, the other one, the one that the temple was based on. And to me, once I understood the connection to the temple and Masonry, I didn't have any problem with it. Because I knew the truth. And when I walk into a Mormon chapel, I see Protestant benches and a Protestant-style pulpit. That wasn't revealed from an ancient order by Joseph Smith. The Mormons just borrowed the way that Protestants who were joining the church liked to do service. When the church started collecting hymn books, there's so many Stephen Foster songs in there. Stephen Foster was like the Prince of the 1840s. He was very popular, wrote a lot of popular songs, and they would take these tunes, which would be popular, and they would add their own words to it. I don't have any problem with that. I didn't have any problem with that the restoration can still use these ideas. And I think that's part of Joseph Smith's brilliance. I say this all the time, he was a magpie. He would collect things from wherever and construct something that spoke to them. And my stand has been the church should be just much more open about this stuff. Just acknowledge it. Because if they'd done that, I might still be in.
The weird thing about it is I've got an upcoming interview with Cheryl Bruno and Claire Barris on Masonry. And
I just did Claire last week. I'll probably beat you out.
Oh yeah, you'll definitely beat me out. I've got so many interviews, and it takes me a lot longer to get them out.
It does. Shout out to all the podcasters. Doing the back end work is a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. But in the early days, in the 1800s especially, the church was very open about these Masonic connections. And then in the early, I want to say the 20s, I might have that wrong, but that's when they started distancing themselves from Masonry and kind of denying these connections. But I mean, clearly, the temple ceremony is very similar to the Masonic ceremony, but it also has some drastic differences.
It's had its own life. It's had its own legs. And even from the beginning, it was a merging of this Masonic ceremonies with Joseph Smith theology.
And Joseph Smith believed that he was restoring true Masonry through the endowment. And so they never denied these originally.
Nope.
And it's sad that they've tried to hide it, but I mean, it's there.
It's unnecessary, and everyone will always point out that politicians and they always fall from the cover up, not from the original sin. And what the church is struggling with the most now is not dealing with difficult parts of their doctrine. Although they have difficult ones they have to deal with. It's that they've covered them up so much. So people say, well, why doesn't the church go back? The problem is the history has been rewritten so many times. The church doesn't have a landing spot.
Well, but we're a church of revelation. You can change it anytime you want, right?
Which is why you should be in charge. Do you see how I gave this argument that a lot of ex-Mormons did, and you deflated it instantly? And you're right. But they... The church authorities empower people like me. They do. Because they give us all the tools we need. Yeah. And these tools don't need to be there. You just lean into it. You just say, yeah, Joseph Smith was riffing on Masonry. Isn't it wonderful?
Yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, the funny thing is, I was talking with Benjamin Schaefer and David Patrick, and they said that they have missionaries. In fact, David Patrick's the mission president for I guess this area, and he said that they would go down.
Is it the Peterson group?
I think it is. Yeah. I'm not sure on that. I think it is Peterson. But they would send their 18, 19-year-old missionaries to Manti to do combat with the evangelicals, with the annoying evangelicals that are like, Mormons are going to hell and whatever.
Right.
And they believe in the Adam God doctrine, and they're like, yeah, we do. And he said so that they would take the brunt from the evangelicals and let the Mormons walk by in peace. So that was kind of funny. I was like, well, that's a nice service.
So what is it about Mormonism, and this is not a trap question, what parts really speak to you? What parts recharge your soul?
I remember talking with Chris Smith. Do you know Chris?
Oh, Chris is, yeah.
So Chris is an ever Mormon.
Chris has never been a Mormon. He's brilliant. He did his PhD in history, a lot of Mormon work.
And I saw him at Mormon History and at Sunstone, and in both times he said, these conferences just energize you.
They do.
Because he doesn't live in Utah. He's in Albuquerque. And I was like, I feel the same way, and I live here.
Yeah.
But just, I don't know. I love the controversial stuff. I love Mountain Meadows. I don't know how to say this because I don't love polygamy, but I love learning about polygamy.
I do too, and polygamy was a big tripping point for me.
Yeah,
which is ironic, and this goes to the point. It doesn't bother me as much now, even though it was probably a principal reason I left the church.
Yeah, so
that's because polygamy has been around a long time. I believe I'm sort of socially libertine. If people want to have that arrangement and they're adults, by all means do it. So some of the fundamental principles, I think it got used in very negative ways.
Yeah, well, it certainly did. But I love the warts of the history, I think. I will say this, Denver Snuffer, I need to get him on my podcast. I haven't got him on yet, but he has a theory about D&C 132 that it's really 4 different revelations.
Okay.
And even though Denver is a terrible historian, I actually like that concept because he separates polygamy from the sealing power. And so I love Section 132 because I believe in the sealing power. And I love Denver's, although not necessarily historical, interpretation that those are separate, because I want to separate the polygamy from the sealing. And I love that he does that, and I'm like, I like that interpretation. I'm just going to go with it, even if it's not historically accurate.
No, I love that you acknowledge it. I mean, we know William Clayton wrote the Revelation down and talked about it, so we know that didn't happen, right?
Well, yeah, and I talked to Brian Hales about that, and he said, yeah, it was all written down at one time, but I still, and Brian did admit. He didn't say 4, he said 3. But yeah, people have generally broken that up into 3 sections. But, with Richard Bushman, Joseph might have received part of it in 1831, a part of it in 1836, and part of it in 1838, and part of it in 1842, and didn't write it down until 1843. I mean, it is kind of a hodgepodge. The biggest problem I have with Section 132 is where he condemns Emma. That just seems so self-serving to me. I have a real... I talked to Bill Smith about that because he has a book on Section 132. And I was like, couldn't we just excise that part out of it? I would love to.
Well, so maybe this is a good way to kind of give your testimony more power. What would you excise?
Oh, that part for sure. I have...
Pearl Great Price?
Well, I like Joseph Smith history, although it has problems too. I like the Book of Abraham, although after talking with Dan Vogel, I understand those problems better. I love the Articles of Faith. I quote them often. And so, I mean, that's above my pay grade. So I don't know that I want to answer that question, but There are some sections, especially early in the Doctrine and Covenants, where it's like, I want to say 6, 7, and 8 or something like that, where they're all like mission calls.
Yeah.
And it's like, why is this in our Doctrine and Covenants? Like, so William Smith got called on a mission. I can't remember who the 3 are, but there's 3 people. It's basically a mission call. We never address them in Sunday school ever for any reason, because they're like identical wording except for the name is changed in 3 different sections. And it's like, what is the spiritual meaning behind that? Other than, Joseph got a revelation. I mean, I have my patriarchal blessing. I have my mission call. I guess those are personal scripture, but why do we have those in there? Because to me, they're kind of the same. Like, I don't know.
Well, this goes back to, I think that's an excellent point. It goes back to the corporate church, which again is different than Mormonism and Mormon people. Doesn't know what to do with the concept of modern revelation, in my view, and that's what they've got to figure it out. If you look at what just happened this last week, that they wrote an article, who's they? It's unsigned in the Ensign, in the Friend, in the children's magazine,
right, about the word of wisdom,
with no byline, so nobody's claiming it. And then they released a press release at exactly the same time it was released. So the church clearly wanted to amplify it. But in my view, they wanted it buried enough so they had plausible deniability that if 3 years from now they have to say we were wrong about T, then they could say, well, that was never. And I see them playing these games, and it's just kind of like, because I don't think they know what to do. They were corporate men,
Well, and I have an interesting story. I had a listener call me up and tell me he had this big scoop, and it was about the word of wisdom, and that's. Supposedly he'd seen something that was semi-official, and I was like, if you can't get me a general authority to talk about this, it's a rumor. But essentially, because I don't know if you remember, last General Conference, there were all these rumors that...
they were going to let coffee go.
Yeah. And now they're doubling down. And I said, this is exactly what happened in 1969, one of my other favorite interviews with Matt Harris. In 1969, David O. McKay was going to ordain a black man named Monroe Fleming to the priesthood. And then Harold B. Lee came into town and threw a fit. And McKay said, I can't fight him. I'm going to die soon. This is 1969. McKay died in January of 1970. Mm-hmm. So he did die soon. So rather than ordain the black man, McKay said, Lee's going to be president of the church. He can deal with this problem. Well, instead of ordaining Monroe Fleming in 1969, Harold B. Lee had all the apostles, including Hugh B. Brown, who was the one who was pushing for this ordination,
Right.
to sign a statement saying, we don't know why the ban exists, but the reasons are known only to God, and blah, blah, blah. It became this official statement. So they went from ordaining somebody in 1969 to, we'll never do this.
Yes.
And then in 1978, President Kimball did it. So,
and they've seen this happen. These guys.
So this is probably what happened. I mean, I don't have any proof. To me, it's all rumor, but I can totally see that happening. That hey, they were going to loosen the coffee, and now some conservatives, unnamed, I don't know who they are, said no, we can't do that. We're going to put out this statement reaffirming, and because I know in my interview with Jana Reese, she said should vaping be against the word of wisdom? And she said that there were some seminary teachers that told her that kids in their class were vaping because that wasn't against the word of wisdom. Now, I don't know. My personal opinion is that should be against the word of wisdom. But, the word of wisdom was given not by way of commandment. And so
I think the word of wisdom is doing what it always has done, which it serves as a faithful test. Mm-hmm. It's always been an arbitrary collection of stuff that you can't make sense out of.
Only since Heber J. Grant.
Well, I mean, you're right. The history of the word of wisdom is interesting.
Yeah.
Because you have Joseph Smith excommunicating people for it at the same time he's going down to Mosier's for whiskey. You have Brigham Young, who says all distillers should be hanged at the same time he's running a distillery. So, and you get, whenever the church wanted a reformation, suddenly they would lean on the word of wisdom, and then it would drift. And before the 1920s, nobody cared. Mormons drank, Mormons smoked, Mormons drank coffee.
I've actually seen pictures of a spittoon in the Salt Lake Temple.
Yes, yeah. There's a great talk. I should send it to you. I have it marked. I think it was Heber Grant, and it was when he was young, and he had just come out from the southern states like Snowflake and Gilbert. He'd just gone on the tour through the Phoenix area, and he was complaining in conference that no one would give him actual coffee and tea. That they kept giving him the Mormon alternatives. He was kind of bent out of shape about it.
Oh, really? I haven't heard that one.
Yeah.
Well, because I know he was really against alcohol, and the fact of the matter is, Utah was the state that got rid of prohibition.
It was the 36th state that voted against it, or overturned it in 33.
Right, yeah. And so Heber J. Grant got mad about that, and so said, okay, now it's a temple requirement.
Yes, this is
and
true.
So it was a reaction to the reversal of prohibition by Utah.
And it's also how we got 3-2 beer, because in 1934, that's when they said, okay, well, because they waited another year before they actually overturned it. And because Utah had entered into prohibition 2 years earlier. Now, that's not just a Mormon thing. Colorado had entered into it 3 years earlier than the feds. But yeah, then they said, okay, we'll let you drink, but it can only be this 3-2 stuff. Okay. And for a long time, that was the only alcohol that was legal in the state. Now, when I lived in North Carolina, the alcohol laws were amazingly similar. And that's of course, influenced by evangelicals and Southern Baptists and stuff.
Well, and I served my mission in Georgia, and they used to have these giant red dots on these alcohol stores because so many people were illiterate that was how they knew where they could buy their alcohol.
And there's no dry counties in Utah. If you drive to the south, what you'll do is, as you cross county lines, you'll suddenly see a bunch of bars and stuff. And then, because this county's dry completely, and then this county has it. Yeah. So Mormons aren't the only people who struggle with this.
Right, right. Yeah, there are a lot of dry counties in the south, yeah.
So it's fat. But again, to go to the kind of theme, I think it's more fascinating to know how Mormons actually engage with the word of wisdom than how the current prophet, seer, and revelator wishes Mormon history actually were. Or actually was, and I think that's a service you're giving, and I will underline, for a lot of the facts that drive people out of the church, they wouldn't need to, if the church would handle them better, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. That a lot of the people exiting the church, it's a PR problem of their own making.
Well, that's kind of why I have my podcast, is because I just want to get this information out there, and you don't need to leave the church. I feel like I had a niece that kind of fell away, and that was before I started my podcast, and I was like, I wish I should have done that. And then I've had some other family members that have actually found my podcast helpful in staying in the church. And that's what I would like to have happen. I know that the church is not for everybody, and there will be people that leave, and I know I have a lot of either former Mormon listeners, but I just got an email from somebody who told me he was a Muslim listener, and I was like, really?
Back in the day when I was doing Mormon Expression, I would get messages from believers, including a current member of the 70, who contacted me and said that they enjoyed the podcast. It was like a heat sink. It helped them stay sane. It helped them because it was dealing with the reality. And I have listeners from, I remember one who was a rabbi in Israel. She had never been in contact with Mormonism at all, but she just found to deconstruct the religion just fascinating.
Well, and we were talking about different versions of the Bible, and Thomas Wayment from BYU just had one, and I mentioned, I'd like to get one of these Bibles. I had an evangelical send me that version of the Bible. I can't remember which one it was. But anyway, and it was like, I think it was fake leather, but I was like, wow, this is a nice book. He spent some money on this. So
my goal here is not to tell people they should leave the church or stay, but what I appreciate is that you, and there's other folks like you, there's a lot of you who have found ways to know the truth, the truth of history, not like the big T is the true church true or not, but to understand and confront history as it is, to understand the church as a movement that is a human movement, maybe inspired by God, but it still has warts, right? Mm-hmm. And that you're happy, you're well adjusted, you're fun to talk to, and there's a lot of people like you. And I think sometimes ex-Mormons, and I've probably been guilty of perpetuating this myth, they're angry, and the only happiness comes from just leaving it all behind and moving on. And that's simply not true for everybody. And there's a lot of people who find ways to make it work. And most people in the church, their service in the church does good in this world for our community, for themselves. And for that, I admire, and I still cling to that bit of my heritage. I still want to take down chairs at the end of, at the end of everything. I want to stick around and help clean up. And that was part of my upbringing and part of what you did. You jumped in and you participated. Oh,
well, thank you. I will say somebody sent me a link to Reddit that asked, so who is this Rick Bennett guy? Is he ex-Mormon? What's his story? And somebody said, he will be out of the church in 5 years. Mark my words. And I thought, do you know? I mean, I know my podcast is only 2.5 years old, and so a lot of people don't know me. But before that, for 10 years, I had been blogging about this stuff anonymously. And so I'm like, I've been doing this for 13 years now. I think I'm past your 5-year time limit already. So
yeah, for sure. Well, it's a fantastic podcast, Mormon Tangents.
Gospel Tangents. Yeah, yes. Mormons are verboten, and I was never Mormon Tangents. I lucked out on that. So.
And I assume you can just Google it, go onto Facebook, all the regular places, and find you.
And my YouTube channel.
You do a YouTube channel. You've got some books out there where you've transcribed some of these bigger interviews. And
actually, all of them. Almost all of them. There are a couple of people have said don't do it, so I've had to pull back on that. But yeah, almost all of them.
So you're doing great work, and I really do appreciate it's out there.
And that's why it takes me so long to get these out, because transcribing sucks. It's very time consuming.
It is, and that's why I've been asked for transcription all the time. I'm like, oh no. Yeah. I used to even do that professionally when I was young, and I don't want anything to do with
it. My sister helps me now, so that's nice.
Well, fantastic. Thanks for all you're doing, your participation at Sunstone. I guess another plug to Sunstone. It's great. You get to meet people like Rick, and it's so accessible. I'm always amazed when I go to Sunstone, like, oh, that's the guy who wrote that book. That's the guy who wrote that book. That's the expert on this. That's the person who, you can find friends of Mark Hoffman there.
Oh, yeah.
They're all of the we're all B-list and C and D and E-list celebrities.
There you go.
But they're all there, and it's recharging. It's a fascinating time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I've been looking forward to this, and I'm sure we'll cross paths again soon.
All right, thanks, John. I hope you enjoyed the discussion I had with Sunstone Podcast host John Larsen. John, thanks for having me on. It was fun to talk to you, and I'd like to encourage everybody, go check out the Sunstone Podcast. And by the way, we've got the Sunstone Symposium coming up at the end of the month, so you don't want to miss that. So check it out. It's going to be virtual online this year, so please sign up. It'll be a lot of fun. You can meet people like John and Lindsay and lots of other people, so it'll be great fun. In our next conversation, we're going to talk to Dr. Derek Sainsbury. He's written a new book called Storming the Nation, and it talks about Joseph Smith's run for President of the United States of America.
His preaching, his public preaching from 1842 to his death becomes more, he weaves politics and religion together more and more and more. For instance, that July in 1842, he gives a talk where he talks about, and puts an editorial in the Times and Seasons that talks about called the government of God, and that it was a theocracy, right? That God chose righteous people to lead, and the people assented to them leading, and that this is the way that it's supposed to be.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please subscribe to patreon.com/gospeltangents, and for just $5 a month you can hear the entire interview without any interruption. If you'd like a paperback version of our transcripts, go to amazon.com and do a search for Gospel Tangents interview. Also, if you'd like to give the money to me and not Amazon, please subscribe on my website, and I'll be able to send you a transcript as soon as they are completed, and click the subscribe button. You can also find our latest information on facebook.com/gospeltangents, as well as we're on Twitter @gospeltangents. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts. The link is at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents, and you can subscribe there. Also, please give us a 5-star review. If you want to support all of the podcasts as part of the Dialogue Podcast Network, go to lyceum.fm, that's lyceum.fm, and do a search for Dialogue Podcast Network or Gospel Tangents, because, that's a pretty cool one too. Thanks again for listening. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some of our great videos. Thanks again.